Falling through the floor backwards was an exhilarating and terrifying experience. Jimmy's arms and legs were wrapped tightly around his mother's torso as they fell. She, of course, didn't react. If anything, it felt like her legs were still moving her forward, like she was still resolutely walking out the door, unaware that the world they were inhabiting was disassembling around them. Hinged at her feet, they swung forward and down at incredible speed before drifting to a stop. He lay on his back, eyes closed and feeling dizzy from the fall. His arms and legs weren't wrapped around his mother anymore. She was gone. One arm, James noticed, wasn't by his side. It was being held up by his forearm. A tiny twinge of a bite could be felt in the side of his bicep. Immediately, he froze from head to toe as the electrical hum reverberated up and down the length of him. Every hair on his body felt like it stood at attention as his eyes sprung open, full of tears, to stare at the blinding light glowing on the ceiling of the truck. After a long few seconds, the hum stopped like a light switch was flipped off. As his eyes dilated back to a normal size, he noticed Miranda leaning over the back of the seat, holding his arm with one hand and injecting him with the other. Noticing him looking at her, she smiles. "Morning, Sleepy," she greeted him. "Thought you'd appreciate a pain-free wake-up call." She began twisting the butt end of the cylinder till a small flame ignited from the tip, burning away any remaining chemical residue inside. "Just lay still for a bit," she instructed him as she slid open the back window to chuck the pin into the bed of the truck. A gust of cold air wafted in from the window as she did this. "Sorry, that thing stinks," she explained as she began lacing up her shoes. "I'll walk you to the bathroom if you like." James sat up carefully. Once he knew that the pain wasn't there anymore, he leaned as far forward as he could to try and touch his toes. "Let me get my shoes on," said James as he swiveled enthusiastically in his seat to get ready. The first few hours after taking the shot were the best to him. This is where he not only felt pain-free and able to move the easiest, but he had such a boost of energy. Not a fidgety, jittery caffeine-style boost, but a genuine and natural-feeling one. He could sit here and just talk to Miranda, taking in her every word and not feel forgetful or foggy of mind. He could get out and go for a long walk, or even a run. Chop firewood, climb a mountain, whatever. Everything felt like a doable possibility to him. He felt good like this yesterday, but not as strong as it is today. Maybe it was because of the stress of being followed, or that he wasted it sitting in a truck all day long. Whatever it was, he was feeling it much better now, and he wanted to enjoy it. The doors popped open, and James and Miranda hopped outside into the crisp morning air. It was still early, as the sky was still deep blue, opposite from the warm orange rays of the sun. "If the shot didn't wake you, the chill will," noted Miranda as she zipped her jacket up tighter to her neck. Together, they both trudged over to the small restroom building and parted ways to enter on either side of it. The room itself felt like a meat locker as James entered it, though he didn't mind, as it kept the smell of the public toilet down. The high frosted window faced the warm rays of the sun and illuminated the whole room in a tangerine glow off of its white walls. He washed his hands and was about to grab the door handle to leave when an electrical surge locked his whole body in place. Feet rooted to the spot and his left hand tightly gripping the frozen door handle. He just had the shot. He shouldn't be affected by any of this for many hours. The room wasn't spinning. The floor wasn't rocking. No bees angrily pounding to get out of his head. Instead, it was a steady hum that locked him into place. This was an entirely new sensation to James. His eyes were locked on his freezing hand gripping the door handle, yet oddly enough, he was seeing something else come into view. A frosty road curving away from him, lined by snowy trees on either side. Was this a memory too? If it is, it's very recent and not very telling. It couldn't be a memory, though, as it was outside of any vehicle. Instead, he was watching from down low, almost on the ground, as if trying not to be seen. From around the bend came a large green truck. This wasn't any semi he'd seen before. It was armored, with narrow angular windows and floodlights on its roof. Its large flat grille came thundering down the road, clearly in a hurry. James's vision followed it as it passed by and down another bend.
5.5 kilometers. Closing fast.
James thought very distinctly to himself.
Go now.
With that, James's body released, giving him full control again. The hum cut off abruptly, as did the sight of the truck. "Miranda!" he shouted as he pounded on the women's room door. "We need to go, now!" The door flung open to Miranda, who grabbed his coat and yanked him inside. Her hands were still wet and soapy, yet she held her gun in one hand and James's coat in another. "What happened?" she asked immediately. I saw, it was a big truck, an armored military one, and it's driving down the road headed our way right now. We need to leave right now." James spat out at her. She turned and looked at him, her brows furrowed with confusion, but still pointing her gun at the door. "What do you mean? It's not here yet?" She grilled him urgently. I don't know how, but I locked up and I saw it while I was in the bathroom. 5.5 kilometers and closing fast. We're out of time." James explained quickly. Miranda stared at him for another second, puzzling over how to respond before finally nodding. "Okay, let's go." Miranda pulls the door open and leans out to check the parking lot. So far, it's still just their truck and nobody else. "Come on." She gives a tug on his hand, and they move quickly to their truck, all while she and James kept looking, waiting for a larger truck to come rumbling out of the tree line right for them. Throwing the doors open, they scoop up James's bedding and chuck it in the back seat. "Where do we go?" demands James urgently, as he fumbles in starting the truck. Back on the road. Keep going towards the mountains," she replies. "There's some junctions up ahead that we could try losing them on. We just need to stay out of their sight." The truck slides as James backs out of the spot and punches it forward back onto the road. So far, there's nobody else out. Just James and Miranda alone on the road. It's difficult for James to maintain a high speed, with both the icy conditions and the constant curves of the road snaking through the forest surrounding them. Miranda is once again sitting sideways, watching their back for anything coming up behind them. "We're doing good," encourages Miranda. "We just need to make it another 3 miles and we'll hit some small roads. We can take one and find a spot to lay low till they pass." "Well, then they'll be ahead of us," James points out. "What do we do then?" "Hope they don't think to double back on us," guessed Miranda. "Okay then, I guess we hope." James agreed with palpable stress in his tone. "I don't know if they'd recognize this truck anyways." Miranda tried to build confidence in this plan. Yeah. James nodded. He had both hands white-knuckle gripped to the steering wheel as he did his best to balance speed and safety through the curves. He took a glance at her sitting in her seat, staring straight out the back window. "How are we looking?" prodded James. "So far looks clear," she replied shortly. The road finally straightened out, allowing James to risk pushing the truck a bit faster down the long, shallow grade. About a minute later, Miranda had a question. "This truck you saw, was it green?" she quizzed. James's eyes immediately snapped to the rearview mirror to see a large green military truck gaining on them from about a kilometer away. "Okay, shit," James swore as he looked back forward. "Don't panic yet. Let's see what they do first." Miranda tried not to sound concerned, but wasn't doing a very good job at it. James noticed her gun gripped tightly in her hand, but kept low on her lap. He couldn't help but keep glancing back through his mirrors as the truck closed the gap. "Got the plates, Captain," Hirsch announced as Roland looked at his tablet in hand. "Matches description and is registered to our contact," Roland confirmed to his team. "Dima, prep the fishhook. Dubois, get us within 30 meters. "Junction ahead, sir," Dubois replies as he accelerates towards the pickup. "Fishhook armed, Cap," Dima confirmed as he sat with a joystick gripped in his left hand and goggles lowered over his eyes. On your call. Close that gap. I don't know if they'll take that turn, Roland orders as the truck thunders along. Roland stands and looks out the front window to see the black pickup with his own eyes, a tarp fluttering in its bed as it too accelerates away from them. 55 meters in closing, Dubois announces as his eyes dance from gauges to the truck ahead. Junction coming up fast, sir, Hirsch adds. He'll have to slow in the curve, yes? Tawil questions the group. I won't have a straight shot, Dima tells him as he twists and tilts the joystick, lining up his shot. 45 meters. He's still pushing it, sir, updates Dubois. 100 meters to junction, Hirsch adds as well. Roland looks back at the truck and the junction point ahead. If the truck takes the turn, the fishhook won't work. Does the road straighten out after the junction? Roland asks, pointing at Hirsch. Not right away. About 750 meters in till a 500-meter straightaway, replies Hirsch, pinching and zooming on his tablet. 35 meters, but the junction is now, Dubois calls out. Sir, Dima asks, gripping the joystick tightly. Hold, Roland orders. Hold fire. The truck takes the junction, curving away from them to the right at dangerously high speeds. Stay close, Dubois, but let them breathe just a bit, adds the captain. I don't want to run them off the road. The curve is long and nearly turns them around to head back the way they came, before exiting the curve right into another the opposite way. Keep a visual on him, Dubois, Roland commands, as the trees start blocking their view of the truck trying to outrun them. Visual, is somebody following us? Asks Hirsch as he frowns at his screen. Negative, Hirsch, Dubois confirms. Roland too looks back over their heads to the tiny rear window of the truck. Nobody was back there. I keep getting blips of another car on the scanner, Hirsch explains as he continues moving the map around on his screen. Hang on, 500 meters straight away, coming up, Hirsch announces eagerly. Dima on fishhook, the captain calls out. Fishhook ready, Dima answers. The two trucks enter the straightaway where they both accelerate to finish the chase. Back to 500 meters, Cap. Dubois resumes his announcements as he guns the truck forward. 40 meters. 35. 29 meters. Fire now, Roland shouts as Dima pulls the red trigger. A cannon blast launches a black barbed steel hook from the front of the truck right under the pickup's bed. Hooked him, Cap, but just his bumper, confirms Dima. Slow reel, Dima. Have a second hook ready. Slow us too, Dubois, Roland orders. Arm up. We're gonna bag them both before they can run. Any visual crossroads? Asks Hirsch. No visible roads, Dubois confirms as he focuses on carefully slowing down the truck they've hooked. Damn, that phantom car is back. Hirsch smacks the side of his tablet in frustration. Where's the phantom car? Roland asks, taking his eyes off the truck to look at Hirsch. Closing fast, but from the trees to our right, there's no road there, Hirsch explains before being cut across. Impact! Impact! Roland calls out with just enough time to take his seat and hit the seatbelt button. With a small blast, a 3-point seatbelt straps the captain to his chair right as it happens. The truck is suddenly hit hard at the back right corner, causing them to start spinning off the road. With the pickup hooked to the larger truck, it too is tugged hard into a spiral, following the large truck off the road and down a small embankment. Miranda had buckled with no time to spare. She didn't question James's instructions to brace for impact, and that may have saved her life. The truck was violently yanked backwards as the larger one behind them was suddenly spun from the road. James wasn't ready for the tug and slammed his head into the steering wheel. It was a sudden jolt of electricity, not pain, that James felt radiate out from his head. Without any rocking or swaying, James was already upside down, suspended from the driver's seat and held down by his seatbelt. Everything felt like it slowed down drastically, as if the world around him was now moving at half its normal speed. He turned his head slowly to look at Miranda's body flailing around from the sudden backwards jolt. His vision was severely blurred, but it appeared that she was quick enough to raise her arms up to shield her head. "Come on, up on the table, son," James Sr. instructed. James turned his head, looking away from the slow-moving and blurry image of Miranda in her seat, to the suddenly crystal-clear image of his young father sitting in front of him. He wore a crisp white lab coat over his violet button-down shirt, a sight Jimmy wasn't unfamiliar with, though to see him rolling around on a stool in a clinic was new to him. He had never been to his father's place of work before. "Now, for your first day, we're just going to do some blood draws and a scan of your head," James went on. "Nothing too scary. You've already done this before." James shot a quick and apprehensive glance up at his wife before continuing. She hadn't noticed, as she was focusing on fixing Jimmy's hair with her fingers. "We'll go over the results of what we find and match them up with the other doctor's findings. Then, if you'd like to keep going, we can work on getting rid of this problem once and for all." Tara sighed audibly as she looked away towards the equipment against the wall. "The choice is fully yours to do this, Jimmy. But if you do this, we'll have to commit to seeing it through to the end." His father grabbed Jimmy's shoulders to hold his focus. "We cannot stop halfway or go back." "I get it, Dad." Jimmy nodded to his father. The weight of his hands pressing down held Jimmy onto the inverted exam table so James wouldn't fall into the ceiling below. "You don't really, Jimmy," interjected Tara from a few feet away. Her back was to them both as she studied the machines around the room, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "Tara, we spoke about this," James sternly warned her, without breaking eye contact from Jimmy. "But he doesn't, James." Tara turned to face him now. "He's just a kid who doesn't know what's coming," she argued, her voice stripped of any emotion as she spoke. One hand reached up to fiddle with the pendant of her necklace. "Well, he's lucky to have me as his dad, as well as his doctor." James cut her off with an encouraging tone. "You will know everything I'm doing as we do it. I'll tell you all of the different options we have to explore, and you'll help make each of these decisions." Tara just turned away again, her face inscrutable. "If you're ready, Jimmy, we'll get started," James told his son. "I'm ready, Dad." Jimmy nodded in agreement. His dad smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. Another jolt of electricity, and James was shot back to the present, with the ground once again firmly beneath him. The truck was no longer moving, and it was darker than usual in the cabin. Only some daylight came from the back window, giving small streaks of light to illuminate where they were. "Miranda?" James called out hoarsely. She didn't answer right away. James reached his hand out to her, but pulled it back quickly, as his arm stabbed him with pain. He gingerly grabbed it with his other hand to find that it now bent in a spot it wasn't supposed to bend. I'm fine, Miranda finally replied. She spoke softly and wasn't moving much from her seat as she took stock of herself. "Are you okay?" she asked in turn. "I think my fucking arm's broken," James swore as he winced from the pain of moving it. "Oh, shit," Miranda swore as well. "Hang on, I've got something for it." She clicked on the overhead light and immediately dug into her bag at her feet. In a moment, she pulled out a bright blue bracelet. "Give me your arm. Quick," she snapped as she unbuckled and slid over to him. "Try to keep quiet," she instructed as she slid the bracelet over his hand and carefully down past the break, almost to his elbow. "Here, bite this," Miranda told him as she forced her coat up to his mouth. "Are you serious?" James questioned her as he stared at the coat in front of him. "Yes, do it now," she hissed in a low voice, pushing it against his lips. James did as she instructed. Once his mouth was full of her coat, Miranda grabbed 2 white pull tabs on either side of the bracelet and pulled hard on them. James winced and moaned as the bracelet was snugly pinched tight to his arm, like a drawstring bag. The sharp stinging pain grew worse as she began to pull and stretch it up and over the break point towards his wrist. I know. I'm sorry. Miranda apologized as she continued tugging the bracelet as it extruded into a bright blue sleeve, shrink-wrapped to James' forearm. Once she reached his wrist, she spun the white pull tabs around to where they stuck to the blue surface. It's fine. That could have been worse. James spoke as he pulled the coat back out of his mouth, before Miranda violently jammed it back in again. James tried protesting, but couldn't get any words out. Before he could try yanking it back out, the blue sleeve began to heat up rapidly. It got hotter and tighter till it felt like his skin was being scalded. Miranda had already intercepted his other arm to keep it from clawing at the blue wrapping. I'm sorry. Just hang in there. It's almost over. I promise. She continued as she held his hand and stroked his cheek. James just looked down at his constricted arm. The heat and pain from squeezing the brake was reaching unbearable levels at this point. He started to feel physically sick from the sudden building pain and heat this thing was causing. Suddenly, and without warning, it instantly forced his broken bones to realign with themselves with a sharp snap. James let out a muffled moaning whimper as it did so. The blue sleeve immediately began cooling and releasing its constriction before solidifying into what felt like a traditional cast. You can use your hands still, and even bend your elbow like normal. Just no lifting anything with it till we get it off you, okay? Clarified Miranda. Her face was inches from his as she fought for his attention. He kept wanting to examine his right arm. He finally nodded his understanding as she backed off of him, turning her attention to their surroundings. Wordlessly, she clicks off the cabin light, plunging them back into the semi-darkness of wherever they are. Outside, voices could be heard. Their pursuers were emerging from their truck and were most likely moving in closer. Does your door open? Miranda asked as she scooped up her bag from the floor. James opened his driver door carefully and stepped out, with Miranda following him closely. Through the slim light beams coming from around the perimeter of the truck, the silhouette of a car parked just 10 feet ahead of them could be seen. Tools and car parts were strewn all over the ground from the wreck, allowing many opportunities for tripping. Now what? Whispered James, as he cautiously pulled his coat up over his blue cast. The inside of this garage was very cold, and led them both to immediately shiver. Over there. Miranda came close beside him and turned his chin to face the glowing silhouette of a door on the far side of the garage. We get there quickly and quietly and slip out into the trees while they go for the truck. James nodded in the darkness and grabbed her gently with his right hand. He didn't feel confident to squeeze tightly for fear of feeling the stabbing pain of the brake again. He led her forward and around where he imagined the back of the parked car to be, slowly sweeping his foot in front of him in search of tripping hazards. His shin gently found the bumper, forcing him to carefully change course. Shuffling feet in the snow could be heard back around their truck, stuck in the wall. They knew they had to pick up the pace. Hirsch, see if you can work this lock. A muffled voice could be heard speaking outside the car bay door to their right. They were starting to be surrounded. Past the first car, James's knee found another car, a bit harder this time. He grunted from the surprise and dull pain. Miranda squeezed his hand in sympathy and steered him to the left with her other hand. There's another door over here, called out a voice now blocking their clever escape. It seemed like they were surrounded on all sides, and it would be a matter of time before they were caught. James just held Miranda's hand as he backed them up from the door. A loud thud coming from the garage roof led James, Miranda, and all of the voices outside to freeze. The heavy object leapt off of the roof and landed hard on the ground below. Open fire! Was barely heard, as the strange gunfire could be heard going off outside. Metallic rumbling and growling accompanied the firefight as a few stray rounds blasted new sources of light through the garage walls. Miranda gripped James's arm and moved closer to him. They both crouched low, staying rooted to the spot as the sounds of shouting turned to yelling and fear, their heart rate escalating at the sounds of violence beyond the flimsy wall. Fall back! Fall back now! Was barely heard above the chaos. The gunfire moved away from them until everything fell silent. James and Miranda stayed still for another moment, afraid they'd catch a stray bullet. They finally plucked up the courage to stand up, but stayed still a bit longer, just to be sure there wasn't an ambush waiting for them outside the door. Once they were confident there wasn't any more movement outside, James turned back to the small door. They took 2 steps before the door burst open with a bang and a bright flash of outside light, blinding them for a moment. Miranda screamed as James stumbled backwards into her. Through the doorway, something large and white slinked in, quietly disappearing into the shadows as the door slowly swung closed again. "What happened?" Miranda whispered into James's ear. James just shushed her and squeezed her hand, ignoring the dull ache he was feeling in his arm. His heart was thumping fast from the rush of adrenaline in the firefight, and now whatever they were shooting at was inside the dark garage with them. The silence was occasionally broken by the small sounds of a chain being brushed, or an object rolling on the ground. The random sounds were approaching them from behind, emerging from somewhere between the 2 cars. Opening his eyes as wide as he could, James strained to see what was moving in there with them. The small noises had stopped, leaving them with just the sounds of their own heavy breathing. He slowly reached his left hand out in front of him, both curious and afraid of what he might touch in the darkness. A surge of electricity locked his whole body in place once again. His left hand held out in front of him, his right hand holding Miranda's, and his feet rooted to the floor. His vision changed from the nearly ink-black room to a black and white image of himself and Miranda. She stood to his right, holding his hand, but facing a slightly different direction than him, her face fearful and her eyes darting around the room, hoping to catch a glimpse of something. James himself, however, was not moving. His eyes weren't even blinking. He was locked perfectly still, yet facing directly towards whatever was watching them from barely 4 feet away. The image barely lasted long enough for James to take it in before it ended, along with the electrical body lock. He once again had full control of himself to stumble around in the darkness. "Let's leave." Miranda took a gamble and whispered in James's ear again. "Yeah, okay." James agreed after another moment waiting. Once again, they didn't take more than a few steps before another loud sound made them both jump out of their skin. Their truck was moving backwards up and out of the hole it was stuck in. A better glimpse of the large cat-like creature could be seen, head to the bumper pushing the truck backwards. With loud scraping sounds, the truck was pushed back and out in just seconds, freeing the now black-colored creature to slip back outside. The garage was now filled with enough light to more clearly see all of the obstacles between them and their truck. "Come on." James tugged on Miranda and began making their way back past the 2 classic muscle cars and all of their parts and tools scattered across the concrete floor. With a quick peek to make sure the coast was clear, they climbed into the truck and started it up. After a clumsy 3-point turn, they drove forward and around the garage to see the frozen ground was ripped up by large gashes. The garage and nearby trees were ripped and riddled with bullet holes. In one spot, there was a splattering of what clearly appeared to be blood, and lots of it. He and Miranda shared a somber glance at each other as they cautiously drove past. They followed the gravel path till it led to a paved road, then the highway, where they floored it out of sight.